Greetings, weary travellers, and welcome to my fire. I'm Lawrence Pembroke, keeper of tales and spark keeper of stories. Pull up a stool, warm your hands by these glowing embers. Care to hear a story? I've got a few that might just stir your soul. Oh, and while you're here, let me know in the comments below, where are you listening from? A bustling city, a quiet village, or somewhere far beyond the horizon? Settle in and let's share some history by the firelight. You entered the tavern, but not alone. No one entered a medieval tavern alone. Not really. You brought your exhaustion, your gossip, your need for a laugh, and the tavern gave back. Warmth, distraction, a temporary escape from the plague-ridden world outside. But what happened when the door closed behind you? How did this chaotic space become sacred? Tonight we'll step into the shoes of a traveler in 1347, watching as the room transforms from a pit of noise to something strangely comforting. The door groans as it swings open, breathing out warmth like a living thing. Smoky air curls around the newcomer, thick with voices and the sour, sweet smell of ale. Inside, the walls hold on to conversations from years past, whispers caught between the timber beams, laughter soaked into the floorboards. Every step across the uneven floor makes the tavern speak. The planks shift underfoot with a sound like joints popping. Candles gutter in iron brackets, their smoke leaving black streaks on beams already darkened by decades of haze. Small flames stretch shadows up the walls where they twist into strange shapes, sometimes just flickers, sometimes forms that might be figures watching from the corners. Outside, the world stays cold and wet. Mud clings to boots, unwelcome memories of flooded fields and frozen mornings. The plague lurks beyond these walls, floating in whispers between villages. But here, the hearth crackles steady as a heartbeat. Its rhythm orders the room. Men pause their talk when logs split loudly, then resume when sparks settle. Near the fire, shadows stretch longest. They pool around legs of tables dark as spilled wine. Some seem to move without anyone casting them, sliding along plaster walls whenever backs turn. Superstition claims taverns keep patrons long after they've left, that certain stains on the floor aren't just spilled ale. Whether true or not, tonight's firelight makes believers of cynical men. This tavern knows more than its keeper. The oak beams over the bar sag with age, their curves learned from centuries of bearing laughter and brawls. Grain patterns in the wood twist like old scars. One shows a knot that resembles a screaming face. Another, a long gash filled with candle wax from years of drippings. Patrons claim the building exhales louder when liars enter, though no one can agree what sound that might be. Everyone belongs. The tavern seems to decide who stays, who leaves uneasy. Drafts find certain necks, no matter where their owners sit. Certain tankards empty too fast, no matter how often they're refilled. Men who swear the ale tastes bitterest when their luck runs bad will still lift the same mug next evening, hoping the building's mood has changed. Wood remembers. The counter where elbows rest bears smooth patches from generations of drinkers leaning in to confess. Bench seats creak familiarly for regulars but groan under newcomers. High on one wall, a dark stain spreads outward like a spiderweb. Some say a thrown mug hit a cheating gambler there in 1292. Others insist it's just smoke damage. The truth matters less than the way fingers still point it out. Floorboards tell their own stories. A warped spot near the door marks where a leaking keg rotted the wood decades ago. A pair of deep grooves show where the keeper drags the ale barrel each morning. Between two tables, the planks squeak, no matter how lightly stepped on. a useful warning whenever someone tries to sneak up behind a dice game. The ceiling hangs low enough that tall men duck, though not for beams. The thick smoke layer collects up there, hovering like a second roof. Sometimes bits of straw drift down, catching in hair or floating into cups. After particularly rowdy nights, the keeper climbs rickety steps to poke fresh grasses into gaps where fists or heads broke through. Sound behaves strangely here. Laughter from the corner carries farther than the drunk man slurring by your ear. Arguments mute themselves midway across the room, leaving only angry gestures visible. When the bard tunes his lute near the hearth, every pluck rings clear, as if he sat beside each listener. Perhaps the walls direct noise where they choose, favoring some voices over others. By midnight, the space feels different. Shadows that moved strangely now lie still. Drafts ease. Newcomers who hesitated at the door hours ago now sprawl across benches like they've sat here for years. Even the fire burns quieter, its embers settling like a beast curling up to sleep. But before rest comes the question of company. Who shares this creaky wooden host tonight? The answer unpacks itself in stages, an unfolding of bodies and tales pressed shoulder to shoulder in the dimness. The soldier by the hearth knows one version of this room. The barmaid knows another. Each patron holds some piece of the tavern's truth. The traveller knows the moment. The serving girl thunks down a wooden tankard, ale sloshing over the rim. And suddenly you're weighing thirst against caution. The liquid inside isn't clear. It couldn't be, not with the brewing methods of 1347. Tiny shadows move in it, flecks of grain or yeast, maybe something that used to be part of the brewer's beard. You pretend not to study the contents too closely. Everyone around you already took their first sip. Hesitating now marks you as an outsider. The tankard itself tells stories. Your fingers find dents where someone likely banged it against a table during an argument. A dark stain rings the inside halfway down. Some stubborn residue, even scrubbing with river sand, won't remove. The handle fits oddly in your grip, worn smooth by generations of drinkers holding it exactly the same way. This cup belonged to others before you. It'll belong to others after. Tonight, though, it's your turn. An unspoken rule hangs in the air. If you drink, you're in. Nobles might sip wine from delicate glasses, but working men share ale from these battered vessels. Each gulp proves you're willing to take what comes, that you trust this place enough to swallow whatever it offers. The room watches without seeming to. Every newcomer gets this trial. Few refuse it. That first sip burns going down, bitter and warm and thick enough to chew. The taste lingers in ways modern drinkers wouldn't recognize. None of the crispness of filtered beers, none of the sterile safety of pasteurization. This ale tastes of the earth, of the grain stored in that leaky barn down the lane, of the well water that might have seen a dead rat last week. You don't compliment the brew. If it's especially awful, someone might grumble, but generally men drink what's given and save their complaints for things that can actually change. Some nights the ale arrives suspiciously clear. That's when experienced drinkers pause. Water could kill you slower than any blade, riddling your guts with invisible threats. Even children drink weak ale because it's safer than risking village wells. So when the liquid in your mug looks too pure, you hesitate twice. Once for whatever floated in it, and again when nothing does. Mugs develop personalities. The crack near the base always spills on your tunic. The oversized one gets reserved for the blacksmith, not because he asked, but because everyone knows his thirst matches his strength. A particularly battered tankard might have its own nickname, earned from some long-forgotten incident involving a thrown chair or a drunken wager. New arrivals rarely get the worst cups. That dishonor belongs to the man who stiffed the barkeep last market day. Contrast this with the high table in the corner, where a merchant sips imported wine from a polished cup. His drink comes from a sealed barrel, his glass rinsed with boiling water before filling. Behind the bar, the keeper hides his personal stash, honey mead bought from a traveling peddler, too precious for common patrons. The hierarchy of drink mirrors the world outside. Wine for those who can command it, questionable ale for those who can't. Yet somehow, these cloudy brews unite more than the finest wines ever could. Sharing a jug means accepting the same risks, trusting the same brewer's questionable cleanliness. When men clunk their mugs together, they're not just celebrating. They're silently agreeing that if one gets sick, they all might. That mutual vulnerability becomes its own kind of bond. Watch the veterans. They don't peer into their drinks or sniff them like noblemen. They raise the mug and tilt it back in one motion, embracing whatever comes. The initial wince fades into something like contentment, not from the taste, but from the act itself. Each swallow proves they still belong here, still trust their luck against whatever floats in tonight's batch. Occasionally, a newcomer tries to refuse. The room senses it before he speaks. The way his hand hovers instead of closing around the offered cup, the slight backward lean as the serving girl approaches. Pity follows him all evening. He'll sit alone, not from malice, but from misunderstanding. By rejecting the ale, he rejected the shared risk that makes this place function. A man who won't drink with you, won't laugh with you, won't fight with you, won't tell you truths worth hearing. By the third round, distinctions blur. The merchant's wine runs out and he grudgingly switches to ale. The blacksmith shares his oversized mug with the shy farmer everyone usually ignores. Someone starts a drinking song, and suddenly half the room croaks along, forgetting whose voice is tuneless, and whose tankard holds more backwash than fresh brew. In this moment, the ale becomes irrelevant. It's the communal gulping that matters, the shared pursuit of warmth and forgetfulness. Some taverns keep their drinkables more carefully than others. A respected house might hang rosemary over the beer barrels to slow spoilage. A particularly tidy keeper could rinse mugs with boiling water between guests. But these are luxuries, not expectations. Most drinkers just hope tonight's batch isn't the one that sends men rushing outside clutching their stomachs before dawn. And what of the food that accompanies these questionable libations? The pot hangs heavy over the fire, its blackened bottom crusted with generations of meals. Steam rises lazily from the surface, carrying scents that shift from inviting to suspicious depending on the hour. Tonight's bubbles burst thickly. Good sign. Thin pottage means a stingy keeper or a strapped kitchen. This batch has weight. You can see it in the way the ladle stands upright when plunged deep. Bits of carrot bob to the surface like river debris after a storm. A knuckle of mutton from yesterday's scraps breaks apart when prodded. Something pale and unidentifiable drifts near the rim. Could be turnip, could be something that once had feathers. No one asks. The pot never empties completely. Each morning brings a fresh scoop of grain, a handful of herbs, whatever meat didn't sell at market. The flavors layer over time, like rings in a tree. That dark smear along the inside edge, that's last week's supper. Experienced travelers watch the serving girl's wrist when she dips the ladle. A quick, shallow scoop means you're getting mostly broth, maybe with a lone onion strand if you're lucky. A deep, slow lift promises chunks. Regulars get meat without asking. Newcomers receive whatever the ladle happens to catch. The tavern boy scrapes the bottom only for favored customers, dredging up the concentrated remains of meals past. Bread serves as both utensil and test. A stale hunk can shingle a roof. Fresh loaves bend without cracking. You tear off a piece, fold it into a makeshift spoon and gauge the tavern standards by how long it holds together in the stew. Dark rye lasts longest. Wheat turns to mush faster but tastes sweeter. Barley bread crumbles on contact, a sign the baker rushed the kneading. Meat distribution follows unwritten laws. The blacksmith always finds 2 pieces in his bowl. The cobbler gets gristle unless he tips extra. Children receive careful portions, enough to fill them, not enough to spoil. Strangers' bowls hide surprises. That lump could be rabbit or squirrel or something the dogs wouldn't touch earlier. You chew without inspecting. Asking ruins the meal for everyone. Seasonal changes reveal themselves slowly. In autumn, the pottage thickens with squash and apples. Winter brings dried peas that pop between your teeth like tiny fireworks. Spring greens tint the broth unsettling shades. Through it all, the base flavor persists, that deep, murky taste compounded from years of continuous cooking. Some claim to detect hints of spices from a merchant's visit 3 winters back. Others swear they've bitten into peppercorns older than the tavern keeper. The first spoonful demands courage. Heat masks some sins, but not all. Your tongue encounters textures first. Grit from poorly sifted grain, unexpected resistance from connective tissue that didn't fully break down. The aftertaste lingers longer than the initial flavor, leaving you puzzling over whether that was sage or mold you detected. Nobody praises the pottage. Compliments invite suspicion. Either you're mocking the cook or you've never had decent food. Silence is the safest review. The occasional grunt of satisfaction passes muster. Only fools request salt. It implies the stew needs help. When a man finishes his bowl and pushes it away wordlessly, that's high praise. Leftovers have their own economy. The tinker trades his untouched crust for the mercenary's meaty scraps. The widow saves half her portion in a cloth for her sick daughter. Near closing, the kitchen boy claims the dregs, fishing out unclaimed morsels with fingers impervious to heat. The pot never fully empties. Tomorrow's breakfast will begin by reheating what tonight's stragglers leave behind. An alchemy occurs in that perpetually simmering cauldron. Through some miracle of thermodynamics and blind faith, the pottage remains perpetually edible. Meats that should spoil transform into tender nuggets floating in gravy. Vegetables surrendering to rot instead dissolve into the broth, lending depth. Even when half the village fell ill from bad pork last winter, the tavern's stew pot emerged unscathed, as if centuries of boiling had rendered it immune to toxicity. Strange items sometimes surface. A silver button glints in a farmer's bowl, lost by some nobleman's servant years ago. Cherry pits appear during midsummer, spat discreetly into palms. Once in a generation, someone finds an intact peppercorn, black as a priest's robe, and the whole room watches as he debates whether to crush it for flavor or pocket it for trade. The true test comes at week's end. By Saturday, the pottage develops a velvety richness no single ingredient could produce. Hunger makes men adventurous. That mysterious sheen on the surface could be rendered fat or marrow. Probably. The tavern's longest surviving patron, a one-eyed shepherd, claims the secret is a single iron nail tossed in long ago, rusting slowly into the mix. Nobody checks. As spoons clink, another sound emerges. News doesn't travel in straight lines here. It twists, grows new limbs, sheds inconvenient facts. The tavern crowd passes information like children playing Whisper Down the Lane. Each retelling adds flourish, trims dull edges, invents better endings. A merchant's wagon overturned outside York becomes a dragon attack by the third telling. A dispute over pig rights escalates to noble betrayal before the cider runs dry. Every patron moonlights as both reporter and editor. The tinker arriving at dusk brings word of blocked roads near Lincoln. The shepherd's boy adds that soldiers now guard those roads. No, wait, maybe they were bandits dressed as soldiers. The miller's daughter overheard a priest say the blockage hides plague deaths. By closing time, the consensus shifts again. The king himself ordered the quarantine, except someone's cousin swears he saw royal messengers riding east, not west, which changes everything. Credibility follows strange rules here. Cooper John's weather predictions carry weight. His family's worked oak for generations. They say the grain speaks to them. But when the charcoal burner claims the Duke of Lancaster keeps werewolves as hunting dogs, even drunk men smirk. Yet tell that same tale after midnight to the right audience. Maybe spice it with a detail about missing children matching the lunar cycle, and suddenly pockets of listeners lean forward. Plague reports mutate fastest. One village loses 3 souls to fever. By supper, it's 30. The disease travels on ship rats. No, through bad air. No, via poisoned wells, dug by foreigners. Preventatives evolve just as quick. Wear amulets of Blessed Rowan, drink vinegar with crushed pearls, avoid south winds after rains. Every man becomes an expert. Every contradiction gets smoothed over by another round of drinks. Harvest gossip follows seasonal patterns. Spring brings optimistic lies. Claims of seedlings thriving despite late frosts. Summer trades in disaster prophecies. Hail the size of goose eggs, mysterious wheat blights. Come autumn, the truth outs itself in the calluses on men's hands and the tightness around the keeper's eyes when tallying grain payments. Still, the most hopeless field hand will swear his barley stands knee-high by May Day, if only to see his neighbour's face fall. The keeper referees disputes without seeming to. His cough interrupts certain arguments before fists fly. A free mug of cider softens a slandered man's temper. When 2 merchants nearly come to blows over disputed wool prices, he'll bang a pewter tankard on the counter, not loud, but with a rhythm regulars recognize as final warning. His ledger holds more than accounts. It tracks who owes whom, which families feud, whose pride can't stomach public contradiction. Smart men listen more than they talk. They note who laughs too quick at misfortune, who asks leading questions about shipment routes, whose stories always cast themselves as hero. The cobbler never volunteers news but can recount every conversation held at his bench last week. The widow's son hears everything. Children blend into taproom backgrounds like mice in the thatch. Some tales demand ritual telling. The blacksmith's account of the Oakham riot grows more elaborate each anniversary, now featuring a flying anvil and 12 arrested lords, though eyewitnesses remember mostly shouting and 1 cracked skull. Old Tom's fishing story about the pike that stole his hat now includes the fish speaking French. Exaggeration isn't deception here. It's homage to tradition. Foreign travelers get cross-examined. Their accents attract both suspicion and hunger for exotic details. A Flemish trader's throwaway comment about cathedral construction becomes proof of papal conspiracies. A Scottish drover's mumbled complaint about border taxes reframes entire political alliances. Locals prize these nuggets of outside truth, even as they twist them to fit local prejudices. Emergency news cuts through noise differently. A fire spotted westward sends men rushing to rooftops to gauge the distance. Word of approaching tax collectors spreads in hissed monosyllables between trusted regulars. The keeper's sudden removal of certain ale barrels hints at anticipated trouble before any official proclamation. Lies have lifespan here. Wild claims either die quick deaths, snuffed by a single credible contradiction, or outlive truth through sheer entertainment value. That Miller did not actually bed the Duke's daughter, but the story survives because it explains her sudden marriage to a 50-year-old knight. Facts matter less than utility. A good tale warns, teaches, or comforts better than any parchment proclamation. Yet, for all its distortions, this rumour mill serves vital functions. The leather worker learns which tannery stocks quality hides before making his monthly trip. Farmers exchange blight remedies that actually work. Burnt lime sprinkled around root crops, though no scholar could say why. Wives send brothers to casually inquire about missing husbands last seen heading toward dice games. The tavern's true product isn't ale or shelter. It's this living web of whispers. Men leave heavier with news, lighter with secrets shared. Tomorrow they'll carry fragments of tonight's stories to fields and workshops where rumors take root or wither in wider circulation. Come dusk, they'll return to see which seeds grew and which got plowed under. Among these rumor mills, certain figures command attention. The soldier doesn't choose the best seat by the hearth. The hearth chooses him. His shadow stretches long behind him, flickering across benches like a second cloak. He uses a broken knife tip to sketch in spilled ale, drawing lines that might be battle formations or the outline of a castle under siege. Listeners lean in close enough to smell old armor oil and campfire smoke clinging to his gambeson. His hands tell stories before his mouth does. The left lacks 2 fingertips, lost to frostbite during the siege of Calais, he says casually when asked, as if recounting yesterday's weather. The right bears a ragged scar from wrist to thumb where a French dagger got through his guard. He lets children trace these marks when they grow bold enough to approach. Each ridge and groove becomes a lesson about blade angles or the importance of dry socks in winter campaigns. Men come to him with questions disguised as challenges. Heard you York boys ran from Neville's cavalry at Cressy. The soldier just smiles and slowly rolls up his sleeve, revealing a diagonal gash that never healed smooth. Ran toward them first, he says, tapping the scar. Learned better after. Laughter follows, but eyes linger on the wound's raised edges. The tales evolve as the night wears on. Early stories feature clear heroes and villains, English longbowmen cutting down foolish French knights, brave outnumbered stands against impossible odds. Later, when the ale takes hold, details darken. The knight who fought so fiercely had soiled himself before dying. The beautiful warhorse everyone admired ended its life screaming with a belly full of arrows. Listeners shift uneasily, but don't stop listening. Children form his most devoted audience. They creep forward from behind father's legs, drawn by gory descriptions of sword thrusts and siege engines. Their fascination falters when he describes men hissing like cracked kettles from punctured lungs, or the way severed limbs twitch in the mud like landed fish. Yet they always return tomorrow, hungry for more horrors. Women listen differently. The innkeeper's daughter times her tankard refills to catch tactical wisdom. How to spot ambush points. What terrain favors infantry over cavalry. Widows linger at nearby tables, pretending not to eavesdrop. Some hope for news of sons or husbands lost in the same campaigns. Others simply want to understand what turned cheerful boys into these hollow-eyed men who jump at creaking doors. Every scar comes with conflicting accounts. The notch in his left ear might be from a French crossbow bolt told to impress mercenaries, or a tavern brawl back home shared with fellow veterans. His limp worsens in wet weather, sometimes blamed on a warhorse's fall, other times on infected trench foot. Truth matters less than the lesson each version conveys. Foreign travelers draw his sharpest attention. He watches Flemish merchants the way a hound eyes suspicious strangers, though he'll share bread with Gascon sellswords like long-lost brothers. When a Scottish trader mentions the border marches, the room holds its breath. But tonight, the soldier just nods. Fair fights, those. And mystery loosens its grip on the atmosphere. His equipment serves as teaching aids. The dented sallet helmet gets passed around so men can feel where a mace nearly crushed the skull beneath. A snapped arrowhead dug from his boot sole demonstrates why you never charge archers without a shield. Even his patched cloak tells a story. The singed edge comes from flaming pitch that killed 3 friends outside Rams. Drink softens some memories and sharpens others. After his 3rd ale, he chuckles about stealing wine from a Burgundian monastery. The 4th brings a story about executing prisoners to save rations. By the 6th, he's silent, staring at the fire as if watching ghosts dance in the flames. Someone usually buys him another drink then, not for cheer, but to keep the quiet from lasting too long. Young men seek his approval, boasting of how they'd act in battle. He listens politely before asking if they've ever pissed themselves from fear. When they inevitably say no, he nods sagely. You will. The certainty in his voice chills warmer than any tavern fire can counter. Old campaigners share knowing looks across his head. They recognize when he substitutes real horror with invented heroics. None call him on it. There's honor in keeping certain truths from civilians. Let them sleep easy while they can. One grizzled archer occasionally murmurs corrections, but only about minor details like which duke commanded the left flank. The keeper allows him to drink at half price, provided he tells at least one good story per visit. Tonight, he repays his debt by demonstrating how Italian mercenaries fight differently from German landsknechts, using bread rolls as armies and a sausage as a bridge. Children cheer when the sausage collapses, sending rolls tumbling. Older men note how his hands shake during the reenactment. As the night deepens, his stories turn practical. How to stanch a wound with spider webs, why you should never loot corpses until the crows land, what rhymes French sentries shout back and forth in the dark. These aren't tales anymore, they're survival lessons wrapped in anecdote. Listeners file them away despite pretending they'll never need such knowledge. When he finally sleeps, often right at the table, head pillowed on his arms, someone usually drapes a cloak over him, not for warmth, but to hide the way his fingers twitch toward absent weapons when footsteps pass too close behind him. Not all patrons come to talk. Some come to listen. And some, like Martha, never have to raise their voice to command the whole room. Martha moves through the chaos like a ship through stormy seas, steady, knowing exactly when to tack and when to hold course. Her apron pockets bulge with the night's tools, a cloth for spills, a tasting spoon, 3 hazelnuts she'll use later to mark which men have hit their limit. She reads the room in glances. The farmer by the door needs his 3rd ale before he'll relax. The linen merchant by the hearth must be cut off soon. The young widow in the corner just wants someone to meet her eyes without pity. She remembers every order without writing. The blacksmith gets a double pour in his 3rd drink. He becomes generous when warm but surly when reminded he's buying rounds. The tanner's son must be served weak, small beer despite his protests. Martha knows his mother would skin her alive if the boy came home stumbling again. She tracks debts through a system of knots in her apron strings, each twist representing a coin owed by men who think she'll forget. Conflict dissolves under her hands. When voices rise near the dice game, she's already there with a fresh jug, steering the talk to harvest yields. If a drunk grabs her wrist, she laughs, while twisting free with a move that leaves his fingers stinging. Twice a night, usually around the 7th round, she'll bang 2 tankards together, not loudly, just enough to make the room blink and reset. Her kindness has edges. She saves the chicken's best bits for old Thomas, who lost his sons to fever last winter. She pretends not to see when the cooper's daughter sneaks extra bread to her hungry siblings. But let a stranger offer coin for more than ale, and her smile turns to flint. A raised eyebrow sends village boys slinking back to their mothers. The keeper relies on her more than the ledger. While he counts pennies, Martha counts breaths per minute to gauge drunkenness. She knows which men cry into their cups after losing at cards, which ones grow violent, which need help home. Last Michaelmas, she halted a knife fight by dumping a bucket of wash water on the combatants, an intervention that became legend after both men later married her cousins. Children adore her for the scraps she slips them, not knowing she's trained them as lookouts. A tug on her skirt means strangers approach. Dropped cutlery signals a pocket being picked. 2 girls humming means the sheriff's men are coming, and certain patrons should exit through the kitchen. Martha's thrice widowed, once by battle, once by mines, once by her own skillet, if the song about it tells truth. Her current sweetheart is the farrier, chosen because he can lift barrels she can't and knows better than to interrupt when she's counting heads. She lets him sit at the serving counter sometimes, where he whittles toys for the children while she works. She moves through a minefield of wants. The tailor needs his ale cold, so he'll linger and spend more. The priest gets warmed wine to speed his departure after Vespers. Traveling minstrels must receive their first drink free, but pay double for the second, a rule that separates professionals from hacks. She measures every pour by the customer's ability and the tavern's need. Men try to cheat her in petty ways. They'll claim they've paid already, swap empty mugs for full ones when her back is turned, accidentally spill drinks to earn free replacements. Martha plays along just long enough to make them embarrassed. A pointed comment about someone's mother or a loud observation about their coin purse usually does the trick. Her real currency is information. She knows whose daughters are with child, which merchants adulterate their wool when tax collectors plan to visit. Some of this she trades, some she hoards, all of it weighed carefully. A careless word could ruin lives. A well-timed one might save them. The widow baker still brings her honey cakes ever since Martha warned her about the tanner's false accusation of witchcraft. She ages differently than other women. Silver streaks her hair early from smoke and shouting, but her arms stay strong from hauling casks. At 40, she moves with the certainty of someone who's mastered her world. Younger girls whisper that she must be a witch. How else could she know who's coming before they knock, or why certain men avoid her tavern on full moons? Martha's greatest skill is invisibility. People confess to her things they'd never tell the priest, forgetting she's there even as she wipes the table beside them. They debate secrets inches from her elbow, not realizing she's collecting each scrap like dropped pennies. The keeper pays her extra to share certain tidbits, but most she keeps, a hedge against hard times. Tonics fill a shelf beneath the bar. Mint for sour stomachs, yarrow for cuts, willow bark for the cooper's aching back. She dispenses them without comment, though the recipients always seem to repay her in eggs or firewood later. When the midwife's busy, Martha delivers babies. When fevers spread, she brews the bitter teas that bring down swelling. Her practiced eyes notice when the dice come out. The dice appear around the third round of drinks, when men's fingers grow loose and their purses feel lighter than they should. Someone produces a worn leather cup. Another slaps down a pair of bone dice yellowed with age. The first wager is always small, a clipped penny, a promise to cover the next round. Laughter covers the clatter as the dice tumble across a table grooved from years of similar games. Those bone cubes tell their own history. One bears a deep scratch across the 3 spot from when a drunken smith accused them of being weighted. Another chipped corner changes how it rolls, a quirk some players account for while others miss it completely. Regulars know these imperfections like they know their children's faces. A newcomer might swear the dice are cursed when they lose 3 throws in a row, not realizing the veteran beside him has spent years learning how they tend to fall. Cards emerge more cautiously. The deck belongs to the tinker, thick parchment squares worn soft at the edges, stained with ale rings and what might be blood. 2 cards went missing years ago during a fight over a chicken bet, so now every game incorporates the gap somehow. Rules shift depending on who deals. One night you're matching symbols, next you're counting pips. Sometimes you're just slapping the table when someone plays a certain card. No one keeps written rules. Disputes get settled by whoever argues longest or throws the loudest fit. Children watch from the edges. They crouch under benches, rolling pebbles like dice, whispering their own wagers. If I win, you give me your crust. Older boys mimic the card players with bark scraps marked in charcoal, learning to bluff by watching whose eyes flicker when holding a bad hand. Girls dare each other to creep close enough to see the gambling tokens, buttons, nails, even a silver ring last Christmas that disappeared before dawn. The stakes climb slowly. A farmer pledges next week's eggs. A shepherd offers 2 hours labor mucking stalls. Then someone mentions the new foal out at Miller's farm, and suddenly real money hits the table. That's when Martha starts hovering nearby, her apron strings knotted to mark who's betting beyond their means. She won't stop the games, taverns thrive on gambling, but she might accidentally spill ale on a man about to wager his winter cloak. Cheating is expected, within reason. The tinker palms an extra card sometimes, but only from newcomers who won't miss it. The dice tend to land favorably for whoever owns them, though no one can prove why. A well-timed cough might distract a player when the lucky card appears. It's all part of the dance. Get caught and you buy a round, cheat well and you earn grudging respect. Desperate men stand out. Their hands shake when placing wagers. They argue over counts that others accept. One weaver keeps playing after losing his last coin, promising tomorrow's wages, though everyone knows his loom's been idle a month. The room tolerates it until Martha catches his sleeve and mutters something about his sick wife. He leaves red-eyed but grateful. Side games sprout like mushrooms. Arm wrestling matches erupt between farmers boasting about harvest strength. Thumb wars distract losers waiting for the next dice throw. Drunken contests of who can stand on one leg longest often end with the victor toppling moments after the loser. The blacksmith once bet he could hold his breath longer than the miller, won the wager but passed out cold and woke to find his boots gone. Foreigners bring new games. A Flemish merchant introduced one played with painted sticks last summer. A Scottish drover showed how to gamble with carved knuckle bones. Each novelty sweeps through the tavern for a fortnight before fading, though elements linger. Some men still use the Flemish counting method even while playing Old English games. The keeper allows it all within limits. He watches for clenched fists. Tom's lute doesn't silence the room, it rearranges it. The first plucked string cuts through tavern noise like a knife through rushes. Conversations don't stop so much as bend toward the hearth where he sits. Dice games pause mid-roll. Arguments halt mid-insult. Even Martha slows her tankard deliveries, timing her steps to the rhythm about to emerge. The instrument itself tells stories. Its scarred pearwood body bears scratches from too many inns, too many hurried packings after late-night performances. 3 strings are newer than the others, sheep gut replacements bought from a suspicious Flemish trader last spring. When Tom tunes it, the pegs squeak like mice protesting eviction. Regulars know this means he'll start with something lively, probably the miller's complaint, to warm both hands and audience. Men shift instinctively toward their favored listening spots. Farmers cluster near the ale barrels where the sound echoes deepest. Merchants claim bench seats with the best sightlines. Children creep forward until mothers yank them back by their collars. Even the hooded figure in the corner adjusts their stance slightly, though whether in anticipation or wariness, no one can tell. Tom plays to the room's mood, not his own. He opens with a drinking song because the blacksmith just bought a round. His fingers stumble slightly on the 3rd verse, a lingering stiffness from last winter's chill, but he covers it by launching into the filthy alternate lyrics that make milkmaids blush and merchants roar approval. The widow baker fans herself dramatically while joining in on every crude chorus. Music here follows different rules than in church or court. Notes bend to accommodate laughter. Tempos stretch when someone shouts for a refill. If a particularly good verse earns extra coins, Tom might repeat it immediately rather than saving it for proper encore. No one complains. Tavern songs are living things, changing with each telling like rumors in the marketplace. The crowd becomes his instrument too. When he starts the drunkard's lament, every 3rd man pounds the table in place of drums. A shepherd's boy blows across his empty mug to approximate a flute. Old Thomas adds percussion by clacking his wooden teeth in time. It shouldn't harmonize, but somehow does. The collective noise of mugs and boots and wheezing chuckles merging into something musical. Requests shout out between songs. The carter demands fair Eleanor, though everyone knows he just wants to moan about his ex-wife. The miller's daughter begs for the Breton bridal dance, likely hoping Will from the adjacent farm will finally ask her to spin. Tom obliges most, skipping only those requiring vocal ranges his evening ale has stolen. He saves the Battle of Halidon Hill for the veteran by the hearth, playing it slower and softer than usual in respect for the memories it stirs. Children make their own contributions. They mimic Tom's fingerings on imaginary lutes, plucking at apron strings and belt ends. A gang of boys near the door attempts harmonies, their cracking voices earning more cheers than groans. One toddler sways dangerously atop a barrel until his sister pulls him down, not for safety, but because she wants the prime dancing space for herself. Foreign songs enter the mix carefully. Tom introduces a French courting tune as "Something I Heard Near Calais," watching the crowd for scowls. When none come, it's been a good ale night, he segues into more daring imports. The Scottish ballad about drowned lovers earns sighs from the women and mocking gruffness from men who've suddenly developed grit in their eyes. By the time he attempts a few phrases of Italian, even the merchant who regularly denounces papist trash hums along. Drunk choruses swell predictably. The first few verses sound ragged but enthusiastic. By the 10th repetition, even tone-deaf cobblers belt the tune with startling accuracy. Errors become tradition. Somewhere along the years, the maiden's golden hair became the maiden's moldy hair in local tavern lore. Tom rolls his eyes but leans into the misheard lyrics, rewarding the loudest singers with an extra flourish on the bridge. Music smooths rough interactions. Two farmers who nearly brawled earlier now share a mug while bellowing harmony. Young Will's fingers tap nervously against his tankard, his gaze flicking toward the miller's daughter for the third time in as many minutes. She sits near the hearth, pretending not to notice him while carefully adjusting her headscarf to show the auburn curls beneath. This is the tavern's most dangerous game, one where the stakes include public shame, parental wrath, and sometimes a bucket of cold water from Martha if things get too heated. The rules are unspoken but ironclad. You don't approach directly. First comes the looking phase. Glances held just long enough to signal interest, then quickly broken. Will passes this test, though his face flushes crimson each time their eyes meet. Next comes the offering stage. He signals a serving girl, pays for an extra honey cake, and has it delivered to the miller's daughter's table by a child too young to understand the transaction. She accepts with a small nod, breaking off a piece but leaving the rest untouched, a sign she's open to further advances. Privacy doesn't exist here. Every stage of their courtship unfolds under the watchful eyes of the blacksmith, the cobbler, and old Thomas, who's pretending to doze by the fire. The miller himself sits at a corner table, ostensibly discussing grain prices, while keeping one hand near the walking stick he's used to discourage suitors before. Will's friends nudge him encouragingly, but their grins suggest they'll roast him mercilessly if he fails. They find ways around the lack of solitude. A spilled drink gives Will an excuse to crouch beside her bench, murmuring apologies, while secretly asking if she'll walk by the river tomorrow. The bard's loud love song covers their whispered conversation. When the miller stands to relieve himself, they steal 30 seconds of unobserved contact, her fingers brushing his as she returns his borrowed handkerchief, now scented with lavender, from her sleeve. The tavern audience plays its role. Women near the miller's daughter suddenly need more ale, giving them reasons to cluster around her table and assess Will's suitability. The blacksmith loudly recalls Will's skill at shearing sheep last spring, conveniently omitting how he'd vomited afterward from heat stroke. Even the children become unwitting accomplices, their noisy dice game providing cover for the couple's stifled laughter. Missteps carry consequences. Last summer, the tanner's son tried serenading a weaver's apprentice and forgot the lyrics halfway through. He still hears mocking renditions every market day. 2 winters back, a bold merchant's daughter kissed a stable hand during a snowstorm, only for her father to spot them through the still open door. The resulting brawl cost the tavern 3 stools and the stable hand 2 teeth. Women hold more power here than outsiders might think. The miller's daughter could end this dance instantly by ignoring Will's cake or accidentally knocking over his drink. Instead, she leans slightly forward whenever he speaks, her shoulders angled toward him in silent invitation. When her father returns, she casually mentions how Will helped rescue old Nan's chickens during the flood, a fact calculated to soften paternal suspicion. Material gifts follow strict protocols. Will can't offer anything too valuable lest he seem arrogant or desperate. A carved wooden button passes muster. A ribbon would be too intimate. When he presents her with a whistle made from a goose bone, something he could plausibly claim was just a spare, she tucks it into her bodice with a smile that suggests she'll use it to signal him later. Physical contact happens in increments. Their knees bump accidentally when the bench shifts. He helps her stand when the bard starts a dance tune, his hand lingering half a second longer than necessary. Later, when passing through the crowded room, they'll manage to brush together back to back, close enough to feel each other's warmth, brief enough to deny intention if challenged. Older couples watch with mixed nostalgia and concern. The widow baker recalls how her husband courted her near these same hearths 20 years prior, though she omits how he'd also been courting the butcher's sister simultaneously. The cooper and his wife exchange glances, remembering when they'd flirted through shared complaints about the terrible ale. Their silent communication now speaks volumes about how tavern romance either flourishes or fails. Interference comes in many forms. The miller forgets his pouch and returns unexpectedly, forcing Will to abruptly discuss crop rotation with a bemused farmer. Martha times her tankard refills to interrupt whenever the couple's whispers grow too obvious. Even the veteran by the fire contributes, launching into a loud story about battlefield weddings when the mood threatens to become too intimate. Yet somehow, connection persists. By evening's end, Will has secured permission to accidentally meet her at the well tomorrow noon. She's tucked his handkerchief into her sleeve rather than returning it, a small victory. As she follows her father out, she pauses just long enough to glance back, her smile visible only to Will in the flickering light. Three greybeards occupy the corner table like it's an extension of their bodies. No greetings needed, just the creak of familiar benchwood as they settle in. Harold the tanner scrapes mud from his boots using the same notch worn into the table's edge over decades. Tom the shepherd arranges 3 hazelnuts in a precise row beside his tankard, his nightly tally of drinks allowed by a long-dead wife. Only will the thatcher remain standing long enough to nod at Martha, who's already bringing their usual small beer for Tom, strong cider for Harold, watered wine for Will, despite his protests about weak swill. Their conversation starts mid-sentence, picking up yesterday's debate about whether last summer's drought was worse than the great dry of 2021. Harold's opening salvo references the withered apple harvest, countered immediately by Tom's recollection of dried-up creek beds. Will waves both off with a story about patching roofs during the 21 heat, claiming he lost 3 stone in sweat alone. They've had this argument 12 times this season, each retelling polishing details like river stones. Newcomers watch them with undisguised envy. These 3 men move through the tavern with unthinking ease, no hesitation over seating, no awkwardness ordering drinks, no need to pretend they belong. Their ritual unfolds with the comfort of old gloves, Harold stealing Tom's bread crust when he looks away, Tom deliberately misquoting Bible verses to annoy Will, Will recounting his thatching exploits with numbers that grow more outrageous each telling. Outsiders see only camaraderie, missing the careful choreography beneath. Their table serves as the tavern's living archive. Ask when the mill wheel broke last and they'll debate whether it was before or after Goody Pettigrew's twins were born. Mention the old oak near the crossroads, and Tom recalls climbing it as a boy, while Harold insists it was already hollow by then. Will settles disputes by producing inexplicable proof. A rusted horseshoe from the '98 flood clutters his pouch alongside a shard of pottery from the inn's long-shattered sign. Drink orders reveal their personalities. Harold nurses one cider all evening, disliking how alcohol loosens his tongue after an incident 20 years back involving the miller's wife. Tom's 3-nut limit stems from his late Martha's watchful eye. He still stops at 3, though she's been dead 8 winters. Will claims his watered wine is medicinal, something about vapors affecting his lungs, though everyone remembers when he could outdrink soldiers half his age. They argue like married couples. Harold insists the new bailiff is corrupt. Tom maintains he's just stupid. Will proposes a third theory involving French spies that neither bothers to acknowledge. Their debates follow well-worn paths. Harold's opening volley, Tom's scripture-based rebuttal, Will's outrageous tangent, then circling back to grudging compromise. By the second round, they're finishing each other's sentences like bards, harmonizing on a familiar chorus. Physical reminders of shared history litter the table. Harold's left thumb bends oddly from when Tom accidentally shut it in the stable door during an argument about sheep breeds. Tom's ear bears a scar from their childhood rock-throwing contest, a story Will tells differently each time, usually to cast himself as the heroic peacemaker. Will's persistent cough dates from the winter they all got trapped in Harold's tannery during the '34 blizzard, breathing vats of piss and oak bark for 3 days. Younger men misunderstand their bond. The miller's apprentice once joked they should marry and be done with it, not grasping how close to truth he stumbled. Their wives understood. Tom's Martha would shoo them out to the tavern weekly, claiming she needed peace more than they needed breathing. Now widowed or long wed, they've settled into this nightly rhythm like oxen sharing a familiar yoke. Silences between them hold meaning. When Harold stares into his cup after mention of his drowned son, neither friend offers empty comfort. They just sit closer, shoulders touching until he's ready to grumble about rising leather prices. Tom's sudden stillness during war songs signals memories of his year pressed into service. The others quickly steer talk towards shearing techniques. Will's occasional lapses into forgetfulness are met with nudged tankards and changed subjects rather than correction. They police each other gently. Harold confiscates Tom's 4th nut when his hands shake too noticeably. Tom reminds Will to take his damned witch brew medicine when coughing fits start. Will pretends not to see Harold pocketing uneaten bread. Both know it's for the beggar girl by the smithy, though Harold would deny any softness. Their interventions happen wordlessly, with gestures perfected over 60 years of friendship. The tavern nurtures this bond. Here they're neither tradesmen nor elders nor widowers, just 3 boys who once stole apples together, now grown old in the same seats. The keeper reserves their table even on feast days when extra chairs might earn more coin. Martha forgets to tally Harold's occasional extra cider. Even rowdy drunks avoid disrupting their corner, perhaps sensing something worthy of protection in their quiet continuity. Newcomers speculate about unseen threads connecting them. Why does Harold tense when the Scots trader mentions Berwick? What happened in Lincoln that makes Tom spit at the city's mention? When did Will start carrying that Flanders dagger, and why does Harold eye it nervously? These mysteries remain locked in shared glances and half-finished sentences, their full history known only to the walls that have sheltered 60 years of conversations. Their presence anchors the room. Dice players pause to hear Will's disputed account of the tanning vat explosion. Young lovers note which arguments make all three men laugh simultaneously. Even the hooded listener's head tilts slightly when Tom recounts village history in his slow, earthy voice. When Harold finally stands to leave, always the first, citing bad joints, the tavern feels momentarily unbalanced until Tom and Will follow like obedient tides. Their greatest gift isn't friendship, but proof of its possibility. Lonely men watch them and imagine finding brothers not born to them. Wives, nudging silent husbands, hope they'll learn this easy communion. Children see wrinkled hands passing cups and perceive an unspoken promise that life need not be walked alone. Each night these three occupy their corner. They reaffirm the tavern's oldest contract, that shared history can warm as well as any fire. The fourth mug works like a loosened belt. Things that were held tight come spilling out. Over by the window, the baker slurs a confession about watering down his flour last winter. His drinking partner, a miller who should protest, just nods and admits to skimming sacks. Neither would speak this freely in daylight, but here in the ale-softened dark, shame feels lighter when shared. Some confessions follow patterns. The young shepherd always weeps about his dead dog around this hour. The cobbler's apprentice regularly declares his love for the weaver's daughter, despite her marriage last spring. Their truths emerge as predictably as the tide. Known quantities the tavern absorbs without judgment. More dangerous are the novel admissions, the tanner's sudden whisper about what really happened to his missing brother, or the gleam in a stranger's eye when someone mentions the robbed merchant caravan. Listeners become reluctant keepers of secrets. When the cooper admits he's been slowly stealing nails from the church repair project, every man at his table becomes complicit. Tomorrow they'll avoid Father William's gaze, guilt prickling despite having done nothing wrong. Other disclosures bind tighter. The mason who quietly describes recognizing a wanted man now drinking 2 stools down plants seeds of unease that grow with each subsequent round. Alcohol erodes caution unevenly. The baker remembers precisely how many jugs it takes before his tongue loosens, 3.5. The blacksmith loses count after 2, which serves as its own kind of safety mechanism. Older men develop systems. Harold the tanner switches to small beer after his second cider, while Will the thatcher waters his own wine. Without realizing it's his son who slips the pitcher to Martha for dilution. Women navigate confession differently. The widow baker's slips about her daughter's coughing fits always coincide with the apothecary's visits. The miller's daughter murmurs complaints about her father's strictness, just loud enough for sweethearts to overhear. Their truths hide in plain sight, wrapped in layers of plausible deniability that men seldom manage. Children listen hungrily from shadowed corners. They store up adult secrets like winter nuts, though few understand the implications. The tanner's boy doesn't grasp why his father stiffens when someone mentions Hastings Market Day, but he'll remember the reaction years later when an old crime resurfaces. Girls note which married men laugh too loud at the childless widow's jokes. information that becomes currency among their whispering circles. Morning regret looms large. Some patrons wake clutching heads, scrambling to recall what they revealed. Others remember perfectly, but pretend otherwise, smiling through gritted teeth at people who now know too much. A few, like the cobbler who annually confesses to cheating at dice, embrace their notoriety, turning shame into recurring entertainment. The tavern keeper arbitrates disclosures. Martha interrupts when tensions rise, sliding a fresh drink between men whose confessions edge toward conflict. Her brother the keeper keeps mental notes on who owes whom. Under the tables and behind the ale barrels, small eyes track everything adults think they can't see. The tanner's boy crouches between kegs, watching men slam dice onto worn wood. The miller's twins huddle beneath their father's bench, gleefully repeating swear words whispered under breaths. These children aren't hiding, they're studying, absorbing the tavern's unspoken curriculum between stolen bread crusts and stifled giggles. Their games mirror what they witness. The baker's daughter and farrier's son play Tavern, using pebbles as coins and grass stalks as tankards. They argue loudly about who must be Martha this round, aping her sharp tone when cutting men off from ale. Nearby, older boys hunch over bark scraps marked with charcoal, their version of the gambler's valued cards, learning to bluff by watching whose nostrils flare with poor hands. Certain behaviors fascinate more than others. The cobbler's girl stares unabashedly at courting couples, tracing their furtive touches in the air with her fingers. The blacksmith's apprentice studies how men fight, not just the swinging fists, but the moments before, when shoulders tense and voices drop. They memorize which insults draw laughter and which bring sudden silence, filing away these lessons for future use. Fear has its place in their education. When the veteran describes battles, children edge closer despite themselves, torn between horror and fascination. The cooper's boy still jumps at loud noises after witnessing an axe fight last winter. Some nights, when drunken voices rise sharply, younger ones press themselves into shadowed corners like mice sensing owls overhead. Yet they always return, drawn by the tavern's dreadful allure. Adults perform for this unseen audience, often unconsciously. The miller straightens his back when telling virtuous tales within children's earshot. Martha softens her scoldings when she spots wide eyes watching. Even the usually surly tanner makes showy displays of charity near the village orphans, tossing them bread with exaggerated generosity. Some lessons come deliberately. Old Thomas gathers children for accidental storytelling. His tales of thieves hanged and liars shamed always feature conveniently clear morals. The weaver spins cautionary fables about drunken weasels and greedy crows while mending garments nearby. These moments stand out starkly against the tavern's usual chaos, like clearings in a dense wood. The tavern keeper tolerates their presence within limits. He lets them collect spilled nuts and crumbs, but shoos them from gambling circles. Children can fetch tankards for tips, but mustn't linger near brewing barrels. When fights erupt, his snapping fingers herd them toward the kitchen like sheepdogs corralling lambs. They understand more than adults credit. The butcher's daughter knows exactly which men pinch Martha's waist when they think no one sees. She's drawn their faces in the dirt behind the smithy. The shepherd's twins recognize the subtle signs of plague fear before their parents do, having watched grown-ups cross themselves at certain coughs for years. Their memories preserve what adults forget. Ask any village child to recount Harold's tannery fire story, and they'll list details the old man himself omits now, like the screaming pig that spread the flames. The cooper's boy can mimic last summer's traveling bard so perfectly it unnerves patrons. These sharp young minds catalogue every inconsistency and hypocrisy, storing ammunition for future arguments. Certain children specialize. The farrier's nephew remembers every debt ever mentioned within his hearing, becoming a living ledger for the illiterate. The widow's daughter has memorized which men cry into their ale about lost loves and which wives sigh over certain minstrel songs. This information circulates among them like currency, traded for favors or protection among their makeshift factions. Mistakes teach harsh lessons. The potter's son once mimicked a merchant's stutter too accurately and spent a week nursing a slapped ear. The tanner's girl got kicked like a stray dog for repeating soldiers' bawdy lyrics at Sunday Mass. Yet these punishments only made them savvier. Now they save their imitations for safe company and learn to mute their voices when necessary. Their presence shapes adult behavior more than anyone acknowledges. Men moderate swearing when children edge too near dice games. Women adjust gossip tones when they notice little ears flinch at certain names. Even the drunkest patron tends to stagger more carefully when the miller's twins are underfoot. No one wants Goody Miller's wrath tomorrow. Some nights when exhaustion overtakes them, children curl up in unlikely nests. The brewer's daughter sleeps atop stacked grain sacks like a tiny barn owl. The cobbler's twins share a cloak under the stairwell, their breathing syncing with the tavern's creaking timbers. From these haphazard beds they still listen, to whispers about failed crops, to murmured hopes for milder winters, to the occasional confession spilled over fourth mugs of ale. The staircase groans underfoot as travelers consider the night's final gamble, whether the upstairs rooms promise rest or regret. Each step creaks differently, some muffled by decades of foot traffic, others sharp enough to make hesitant patrons pause mid-ascent. The upper floor remains the tavern's last mystery, its darkness punctuated only by thin lines of candlelight escaping through door cracks. Men assess their potential bedmates with the care of chess players considering risky moves. A merchant eyes the drunken farmer who's rolled onto his side. Could those snores mask sneakier movements? Two pilgrims share uneasy glances with the scarred drover staking claim to the pallet nearest the door. Choices narrow as desirable spots disappear. The young clerk hesitates too long and gets stuck between the blacksmith's apprentice and a barrel-chested miner whose breath smells like rotten eggs. Shared sleeping spaces operate by unwritten codes. You keep hands visible. Offer your back to the wall if possible. Never touch another man's pack even by accident. Winter brings tighter quarters. Bodies sprawl like stacked firewood. Strangers pressed hip to hip for warmth. Some sleep with one eye open like the veteran who always positions his dagger hilt where his fingers can find it half asleep. Others embrace the exhaustion, collapsing face first onto pallets that release clouds of dust and straw mites with each movement. Alternatives exist for those unwilling to risk upstairs. The cooper snores, propped against a barrel, his neck bent at an angle that promises morning stiffness. A drover curls beneath the serving table, using his cloak as both pillow and protection from trampling feet. By the hearth, old Thomas occupies his regular chair, head lolling forward until the next ember pop startles him semi-awake. They trade comfort for control, better sore limbs than stolen coins or unwanted hands in the dark. Mattresses tell stories. Straw pokes through thin ticking in the cheap beds, leaving patterns on skin come morning. Fleas jump ship between sleepers with impartial efficiency. Bloodstains on one pallet's edge whisper of past violence, while a suspiciously clean patch on another hints at recent laundering after unpleasant incidents. Children of tavern staff know which beds to avoid, the one that sags like a hammock traps sleepers. The corner spot collects ceiling drips when it rains. Nighttime noises form their own language. A chorus of snores rises and falls like frog song in a marsh. Someone mutters in their sleep foreign words or fevered nonsense. Boards creak under furtive footsteps that pause outside doors. Mice scritch in the walls, drawn by crumbs ground into floorboard gaps. Listen closely and you might hear the telltale chink of coins changing hands in the darkness, though whether for honest trade or theft remains unclear till dawn. Trust is the ultimate commodity here. The widow baker shares her room only with other women, barring the door with a chair after last summer's incident. Young Will pays extra to bed down near the miller's family, betting their presence will deter would-be thieves. Soldiers traveling together sleep back-to-back by unspoken agreement, each man's shield strategically placed within reach. Nobody comments when Father Gregory checks under all the pallets before retiring. After last winter's smuggler scare, even pious men take precautions. Morning reveals the night's casualties. The merchant rubs his neck, puzzling over how his purse strings came untied. A pilgrim finds his good boots missing, replaced by a pair 2 sizes too small. The blacksmith's apprentice sports a fresh bruise no one remembers him earning. Downstairs, Martha sweeps up debris, a broken clay pipe, a trampled cap, a single die that must have tumbled from someone's pocket during nocturnal intrigues. Strange sights greet early risers. The drover's apprentice sleeps atop the linen chest rather than beside it, clutching his staff like a newborn. A stranger's boots dry by the fire, their soles worn through. Under the counter's scratched oak lies the tavern's true authority. A ledger bound in cracked leather, its pages swollen with spilled ale and years of secrets. The keeper's thick fingers turn them carefully, revealing columns of numbers interrupted by cryptic notes. J. Smith, 3 ale, 1 bed, owes 2 pence, sits beside Beware Left Hand in the same neat script. Patrons see only the keeper's impartial face, never suspecting how this book remembers every favour and grudge. Wine stains obscure certain entries like deliberate redactions. A dark splash blots out half a page from last Michaelmas, perhaps coincidental, perhaps hiding accounts from the night the merchant disappeared. Older spills tint earlier pages amber, making some notes harder to read than the Latin in church missals. The keeper knows each mark's origin. This smudge came when Harold confessed to shortchanging the miller that one appeared seconds before the cooper's fistfight. The coding system reveals itself in subtle symbols. Tiny crosses mark reliable customers, their tabs allowed to stretch when harvests fail. Dashes beside names indicate violence risks. 1 for verbal outbursts, 2 for thrown furniture, 3 means keep the cudgel handy. Most damning are the small circles denoting men who've brought trouble from other villages. These get watched closer than fresh ale for floaties. Tonight's editions follow patterns. The new drover earns a cross. He helped Martha lift a barrel without being asked. The wool trader receives 2 dashes after arguing prices too aggressively. Most telling is the tiny X by the hooded figure's single ale purchase, a symbol last used for the coroner's spy 3 winters back. Food orders get noted too. The miller's daughter's uneaten honey cake merits a raised eyebrow and a question mark. Some pages serve dual purposes. Between mundane tallies of candle stubs and firewood lie personal reminders. Ask Tom about missing sheep hides between beer purchases. Midwife owes 3 farthings shares space with a crude sketch of her cheating husband at the dice table. Toward the back, partially torn sheets hold darker notes. Names of men who left without paying, women whose drunken confessions might prove useful later. Children appear as expenses or assets. Cooper's boy, broke mug one day, contrasts with widow's daughter, helped sweep swan egg. The sharp-eyed will notice certain youngsters' names recur near mentions of missing trinkets. Others feature with unexpected sums, like the tanner's quiet son who somehow merits plus 2 pence every fortnight. Payment for services the keeper never details. Gossip transforms into ledger lines. A drunken farmer's boast about outwitting the tax collector becomes W owes 5 shillings royal duty. The cobbler's muttered complaint about his apprentice's loyalty appears as Martin to France. Even Martha's observations filter in, her coded reports of who flirted with whom appearing as cryptic A plus B by hearth. Contradictions abound between public face and private notes. The keeper outwardly shrugs when asked about brawls, yet records every participant and instigator. He pretends not to track who shares beds upstairs, but marks J plus R room 3 with monetary adjustments. That cheerful indifference to politics, belied by meticulous tallies of which nobles' names draw cheers versus sneers. Stains aren't the only censors. Entire passages hide behind invented accounting, rows of numbers that don't add up mask-sensitive transactions. The page covering last winter's special shipment shows suspiciously round figures for ale sales, all entered in darker ink. Near the spine, a scorch mark conveniently obscures whatever happened during the visit of the Duke's bailiff. The book holds generational knowledge. Flipping backward reveals ancestors' handwriting, a grandfather's cramped script noting plague year, burn bed straw daily, a mother's looping letters describing which travellers avoided the King's Road. Some entries recur like seasonal diseases. Bad barley, raise prices appears every 7th or 8th harvest alongside clustered debts forgiven per old agreement. Tools of the trade surround it. A quill worn to a nub leans against the current page, its tip hastily wiped clean after jotting tonight's final sales. The inkhorn contains not just black oak gall but red ochre for special marks, like the scarlet line through a mercenary's name after he threatened Martha. A smooth river stone serves as paperweight and occasional weapon, its underside stained from crushing bedbugs. Regulars sense the ledger's power without understanding it. The blacksmith always pays his tab early, avoiding scrutiny. The widow brings extra honey cakes when she needs her son's debts extended. Even the arrogant wool merchant speaks politely within earshot of the counter, knowing some words might become inked evidence. Strangers dismiss it as mere accounts. They don't see how the keeper's fingertip sometimes pauses over certain names, how he breathes differently when adding certain sums. A Flemish trader once joked about fake numbers in his own country's taverns and found his prices mysteriously doubling next round. Martha alone shares partial access. Her smaller script appears occasionally. YN spilled on S or dice cheat, cut off. She's allowed to tally routine ale sales but steps back when the keeper records confessions or calculates interests. Their silent division of labor maintains plausible deniability. Neither can betray what only one officially knows. The book never closes completely. Even at night it lies open beneath the counter, a few blank pages left exposed like bait. Drunks have been known to peek, only to find the keeper suddenly wide awake and offering an expensive nightcap. Thieves who've tried stealing it invariably return it within days, sometimes bloody, sometimes sobbing, always unwilling to explain why. History clings to its pages. Smudged fingerprints from 3 generations of keepers overlap where they gripped the spine during crises. Certain wine stains contain embedded oat grains from long-forgotten feasts. The leather binding still smells faintly of smoke from the '98 fire, when the keeper's grandfather rescued it before the roof beams fell. Outside, the town sleeps. Inside, the fire burns low. The embers glow low but knowing, their light catching faces like a final audience before sleep. This fire has watched 1,000 nights like this, watched men laugh too loud at jokes they'll regret in daylight, watched hands slide coins across tables after last throws, watched lips breathe confessions too quiet for daytime ears. Now its warmth fades slow but sure, pulling patrons closer as its embrace thins. Regulars read the flames like monks deciphering scripture. The blacksmith positions himself where glowing coals still throw heat, his back forming a human wall between cold drafts and the widow's seat. Old Thomas scoots his stool nearer without seeming to move, preserving proximity to warmth without admitting need. Children nestle into parents' sides, their little fingers unconsciously stretching toward the orange glow that reflects in their blinking eyes. Last call happens without announcement here. There are no church bells at this hour, no town crier to mark the time. Instead, Martha starts clearing the emptiest tables first, her clatter louder than necessary. The keeper lets certain barrels run dry without fetching replacements. Word spreads through the room like smoke. Shoulders nudge neighbors, chins jerk toward the dying fire. Even drunkards sense the shift and wonder where the evening went. Final toasts carry more weight. The blacksmith raises his mug to absent friends, a phrase that makes the veteran's knuckles whiten around his cup. Women sip slowly, making one drink last through 3 men's rounds. Strangers who bought freely earlier now calculate whether they can afford another. Those who can't pretend to drink from empty vessels, unwilling to be first to acknowledge the night's end. Whispers flourish in the firelight's retreat. The farrier leans close to the baker, murmuring about a sick horse that might accidentally end up in stew pots if the ailment worsens. The priest hears confession from a man who'd never kneel in daylight, absolving small sins between swallows of watered wine. Even the keeper speaks softer when tallying last sales, his voice dropping as the light does. Children fall asleep to adult truths. The weaver's daughter slumps against her mother, only half hearing talk of unpaid debts coming due. The miller's youngest dreams through his father's quiet discussion of which fields might go fallow next season. Their small bodies sink into the warmth of laps and leaning posts, storing these snippets to puzzle over years later when childhood suddenly makes sense in retrospect. The fire's decay exposes things. Skin appears sallow without its golden light. Stains on tunics look more like blood than wine in the graying glow. A chipped tooth catches the light differently when flames subside, making harmless tavern regulars look momentarily feral. Men instinctively reach for weapons or coins when the shadows stretch just wrong, an ancient reflex not yet dulled by ale. Dancers become stumble-footed. The bard's fingers slip on lute strings as the room darkens. Even Martha miscalculates steps, her practiced ease disrupted when embers no longer brighten the floor's uneven planks. Lovers untangle, their corners no longer so private. Gamblers squint at dice just as the keeper accidentally blocks the last good light with his bulk. A hint even thick skulls understand. Some resist the ending. The tinker starts another song, though the bard's packed away his instrument. Old friends replay decades-old arguments like children begging to stay up later. A few newcomers protest when Martha collects their mugs, not yet fluent in this wordless language of diminishing firelight. The keeper allows small rebellions, an extra half-hour here, a forgotten ale there, but the tide can't be turned. Objects reveal second lives in this fading glow. The dented tankard used all evening looks suddenly cheap in the graying light. A carved ring showcased earlier now seems dull without fire flash in its grooves. Even faces change. Boastful grins sag, proud postures slump. Eyes that sparkled with ale now just look wet and tired. Only the veteran appears unchanged, his scars telling the same stories in any light. The tavern's magic has always lived in its temporariness. Tomorrow these same men will argue over prices. These women will pretend not to know each other's secrets. These children will feign ignorance of adult woes. But for tonight, for this last shared breath of warmth and darkness, they've been something else. Something bound not by daylight rolls, but by the fleeting brotherhood of flame. Yet the fire requires feeding. The keeper must sleep, and the world outside hasn't stopped spinning just because this room tried to. One by one, benches scrape backward, cloaks whisper off wooden pegs, purses jingle with final payments. No grand goodbyes, just nods, shoulder clasps, the occasional mumbled "God keep you" that means more now than at noon. Soon the sun will challenge what the night has woven, but for now... The cloaks settle heavily on sleeping forms as the tavern enters its quietest watch. The air smells of damp wool and dying fires, of ale-soaked rushes trodden flat by countless boots. What seems like stillness to drunken eyes is hardly rest. The building thrums with nighttime labor, its old bones creaking under invisible burdens. Upstairs, the keeper moves through lean darkness with familiar ease. He counts heads without candlelight, recognizing shapes by their snores. The blacksmith sprawled belly down, the widow curled tight as a fist. His tally matches earlier marks in the ledger, all accounted for, though one purse feels suspiciously light when he brushes past a dozing merchant. Downstairs, Martha kneads tomorrow's bread dough, her knuckles cracking in the cold kitchen. Each thump of dough against board carries through floor gaps to mingle with snores below. The building speaks differently at night. Oak beams groan like ship's timbers in a slow tide. Mice scratch paths between walls stuffed with centuries-old chinking. Somewhere above the hearth, a loose shingle taps like a fingernail whenever the wind shifts eastward. Regulars claim these sounds form words if listened to properly, that the northeast corner whispers names of men who died in its shadow. The keeper pays such tales no mind, though he oils the front door hinges nightly to mute their betraying screech. Moonlight rewrites familiar spaces. Daytime's lively hearth becomes a cavern of soot and shadow. Sunlit nooks for whispered confidences now stretch into pits of gloom where tankards left too long gather condensation like cold sweat. Even the serving counter's smoothed edge looks sharper in this light, its curve reflecting pale streaks across ceiling beams. Only the ledger remains unchanged, its pages faintly glowing where spilled ale has dried translucent. Below stairs, preparations continue unseen. The scullery boy turns bacon on a cold griddle so it won't stick come dawn. The brewer's apprentice checks casks by feel, thumbs probing for the telltale softness of spoiled wood. Their movements weave between sleeping forms, travelers rolled in cloaks beneath tables, locals curled on benches like cats. None stir when the cooper's son slips in to reclaim dice lost under the gambler's table, his stolen prize clutched tight as a lover. Night exposes what daylight softens. Without fireglow, cracks spiderweb across plaster walls like frozen lightning. Stains on floorboards declare their origins more honestly. This dark patch is spilled wine, that one blood. The long smear near the door, something no one asks about anymore. Even faces change in sleeping. The veteran's scar looks less heroic now, more like what it is, ragged flesh that never healed right. The keeper's work is never done. He drags a whetstone down the cudgel's edge, testing its bite against his calloused thumb. Tomorrow's first customer will find him yawning behind the counter, mug already in hand, as if he'd stood there unmoving all night. Only the sharp-eyed notice fresh scuffs on his knuckles, or how the dice gambler's usual seat stays suspiciously vacant next morning. Certain truths emerge only in these hours. The widow's son isn't really asleep. His too-still posture betrays him to anyone watching close. The tinker's pouch jingles with more coin than he earned tonight, yet the keeper looks away. Upstairs, the miller's daughter and young Will share more than body warmth, their clasped hands visible to anyone who climbs high enough to see. These secrets are the tavern's true currency, traded in glances and intentional silences. The building itself keeps vigil. Its thatch muffles the wind's keen while trapping guilty murmurs beneath. Floorboards, bent by generations of boots, remember every misstep, their warped surfaces diverting rolling dice or nudging dropped coins towards certain corners. Even the chimney's drawer alters when someone lies. Smoke eddies strangely over false tongues, a quirk superstitious men cross themselves against. As children sleep through the revelations, the cooper's boy drools onto his makeshift pillow, dreaming of stolen dice rolls. The weaver's daughter clutches a crust smuggled beneath her shawl, her fingers twitching like a dog chasing rabbits in sleep. Only the oldest among them, the tanner's sharp-eyed girl, pretends to doze while cataloguing every creak and whisper, her mind filing nocturnal truths for future leverage. Strangers fare worse in the stillness. The Flemish trader startles at every rooftop rustle, his hand creeping toward a hidden dagger whenever the stairs groan. Mercenaries who laughed off battlefield horrors now lie rigid, unnerved by the building's nocturnal voice. Even the hooded figure who seemed so at ease in crowded darkness shifts uncomfortably when moonlight finds that shadowed corner at last. Dawn creeps in like a thief. First a grey smudge at the highest window, then tentative bird calls from the eaves. The keeper blows out his single candle, its smoke curling into the new light as if reluctant to leave. Downstairs, Martha stops kneading, her ears catching the miller's familiar cough outside. Somewhere a cloak rustles as its owner rises early, hoping to slip away unseen. And so we pause here, halfway between arrival and morning. The tavern holds its breath between stories told and those yet to come. The embers fade, but the walls remember. Every laugh, every fight, every secret spilled in the dark. Dawn will bring new faces, new lies, new hopes left in the dregs of abandoned mugs. What happens next isn't written in ledgers. It lingers in the scuff marks where boots dragged toward beds, in the half-finished carvings on the tables, in the way the floorboards still creak where the hooded figure stood too long. Tomorrow morning, we'll test which bonds, forged tonight, were strong enough to last.